Morning. I wanted to speak to you today to outline some points that have come about where my attention was drawn to a recent publication, a study that was published in May 2024 in a British medical journal, which was suggesting that people who took omega-3 products can develop a higher risk of atrial fibrillation than people who don't take omega-3s. And since being having this pointed out to me, this particular article, there are a couple of avenues in conversations that I've had with people that have started to unpick that research itself. And the reason I think this is important is because oftentimes people in public domain will receive a headline from a newspaper, or will receive selective information from studies, and will base their lifestyle behaviours on that. There are many cases of that. So this is just a little summary, if you like, of some of the main points that have been elicited from actually studying and delving into the paper itself by some nutritional scientists. So the first one is that I suppose for disclosure, omega-3's been studied since the 60s, and there's a range of supportive health benefits of omega-3 supplementation in terms of cardiovascular health, cognitive and brain health. By actually taking regular omega-3 supplementation, the immune system, immune health as well, is another one that's come on board. So it's worth putting it in that context and framing it in terms of this is one study from a range of studies, and oftentimes media can go for a headline that might get more people reading their particular article. So in terms of some things to make a note of from the paper, now the authors themselves did actually agree that there's cardiovascular benefits of omega-3 supplementation, and they based the information that they gathered on a very small statistical base within the particular study that they were talking about. Something that was in there is that there was no data that actually described the daily dosage of omega-3. Okay, so again, that's another thing, that there was nothing that distinguished whether it was a high dose, low dose. And again, those things are important because that will have a bearing on the outcomes of supplementation or not. As I've mentioned, that there are many health benefits of regular supplementation that have been documented through numerous studies, since the 60s. And there are sort of areas, as I mentioned, that are outside of the cardiovascular field, but none of those were actually researched or mentioned within this paper. It did sort of hone in, if you like, on the cardiovascular element. So it was based on supplementation or not just on one element, whereas we know it has an impact on more than that. And also, we should also be aware that the atrial fibrillation itself can occur in more than 50% of a healthy population after the age of 50. So this is often one of the things that correlations are mentioned between a couple of things. So they look to see if there's as one thing increases, does something else increase at the same time? Or as one thing increases, does something else decrease at the same time? So we can see that there's a correlation between two sets of data. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that one will cause the other. Okay, so for example, there's there might be a correlation that people with long legs will wear sort of a certain length of trouser. Yeah. Now it doesn't mean that by wearing a certain length of trouser you're going to make your legs longer. There isn't a causation effect there. And similarly, if you've got long legs, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to wear long trousers. It's just that the two tend to go together. So again, that's worth noting. There was no mention of what we call confounding factors. So there was no mention of lifestyle factors, there was no mention of dietary habits, genetic predispositions, so none of that was controlled for. As I've mentioned previously, there was no dosage or actually composition of the fish oil was mentioned. So one of the things that I often say to people is, the fish oil that you take as a supplement needs to be a real high quality liquid form. Okay, not capsules, but a liquid form. And the reason being is that it's less likely to have been exposed to the environment, to oxygen, to have oxidative effects. So it's going to have a lower TOTOX score than other oils. And also in terms of, has it been mixed with a wide range of other oils. So there was none of that included within the study. So, we know that if we're taking a poor quality supplement, that can actually have a negative effect, even though we think we're doing something which is positive. Okay. And something which is pointed out to me is that it is an observational study. Okay, so that the only way we could really be sure is by going through a process called randomized controlled trials, which will determine causation rather than just something that we've observed from sets of data that we've looked at. It is contradictory to a lot of the other information that's out there from a research perspective. As I said, that there are randomized controlled trials that do show positive beneficial effects of omega-3 supplementation. Subgroups weren't explored, so things like age, sex, health conditions, genetic factors, I've mentioned some of those previously, so they weren't considered within the article in question. So as we start to see those things that aren't considered, you can see the generality of the headline. It's designed to grab people's attention, but of course some people will then alter lifestyle behaviours based upon that information without really understanding what has driven that. And if the media is simply basing a headline upon one study, and it's worth noting that it is just a study, and the whole impartiality is you have to look that there are balanced effects. Some studies will prove the effects, some studies will show no effects. That is that's just the way of research, and actually, again, one of the other things that was mentioned within the study is that they actually said in individuals who do have cardiovascular disease currently, there is a significant effect by actually having omega-3 supplementation as part of a comprehensive treatment plan. So it's interesting. They'll talk on one hand in healthy individuals it may contribute to atrial fibrillation, but actually in people who already have cardiovascular issues, it has a positive effect. So it's there are kind of contradictory bits of information in there. So as I said, the whole point of this video was just to let people know that whilst I advocate and whilst I guide people towards supplementation for omega-3 fish oil via Ecology, which is the company that I use. I want people to know that I am aware of other bits of research that perhaps present a contrary point of view, and it's worth acknowledging that and not just blindly following one certain direction, but actually then questioning, in both cases, the validity of the concepts that are being put forward. So, any questions, if you want to get in touch with me to discuss this further, let me know. Ta-da!